Do you remember what your hands can do? Grab a needle and thread, and let's sew together. In this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to do a butted seam, which means folding back the raw edges and then whip stitching them together in order to create literally a seamless look. The outside of a butted seam looks like this. So you can see a little bit of the seam grin, but most of it is actually hidden. This is a technique that's used often on 18th century piecing in order to take scraps of fabric, piece them together in order to make a larger section of fabric. This technique can also be used by modern stitchers who are interested in a zero waste approach to their home sewing. To begin, we want to take the right sides of our fabric and we want to turn them back along where the seam line is actually going to be. So on the right side, all you have is a nice, clean, smooth edge. Take our right sides and put them touching one another, so right sides together. I'm then going to pin them in place. We are going to do a stitch on either the right side of the fabric if you're right-handed or the left side of the fabric if you're left-handed, putting this needle perpendicular right along the edge of that fold, essentially 1 or 2 threads down from the edge. Honestly, I would just do a thread or occasionally 2. But you want to make sure you are truly stitching perpendicular across that fold, because the whole idea is to join these 2 pieces together and actually make it look somewhat seamless. This is in essence going across the top of the fabric. And you want to pull tight enough that it actually lets the thread lay into the fabric, but not so tight that it gathers it, and not so loose that it won't actually be a seam. And you might notice that my threads are relatively close together. So this is the kind of stitch and the seam that you're going to want to lay your threads in really close. Not touching, but still, I mean, that's roughly a 1/2 inch, and I have about 8 in that. So we're probably looking at closely, 15 stitches to the inch, 15 stitches to every 2.5 centimeters. It is very important that as you do this work, that your hands don't accidentally push the top over or pull it to one side, because what can happen is you can actually end up pushing it like this, and then you'll end up having the fabric offset by the time you get to the end. You want to make sure that the fabric is truly lining up with one another and you're stitching alongside. So your non-dominant hand is going to play a huge role in pinching the fabric, pinching it so that it's holding itself. And then I'm using the table as a way to stabilize my hand as it stabilizes the fabric. If I was working on my lap, I'd use my lap, or if I had a pillow, I would use my pillow. But whatever your hands are on top of, what's underneath it is what stabilizes it. So as I'm working, I'm putting that needle again perpendicular into the work, but instead of holding it kind of like this, and so I have to kind of crook my wrist a little bit, I'm ever so slightly kind of angling the work kind of towards like 10 o'clock, and then my hand is stabilized by the table, and then I'm pushing it kind of down towards like 8 o'clock. So that way my hand is still going to be going in that same direction as we've done for basting, for back stitching. It means that the needle is still actually now perpendicular to my work, but my hands are in a similar placement as they were when I was doing like a running stitch and having the needle relatively parallel to my body. So I'm not necessarily having this perfectly parallel, but I am angling it so that my hands are comfortable. The needle can still go perpendicular through the work, and that I'm not crooking my wrist in an odd direction. So you just want to find kind of that comfortable position for your hands as you're working through this whip stitch. Again, just like always, we're going to keep our hands relaxed, keep our back straight. And you can see here how I'm still holding the needle like I did in my thimble video, where I'm just pinching it with my thumb and forefinger, and then the back of my needle is actually laying against my thimble back here. So it's the exact same hand position, But in this case, we're just putting the needle through the fabric kind of in a different spot as we're used to doing. So that is your whip stitch right there. And then to finish this off, I'm going to go back a couple of stitches, maybe go back 2 stitches, and then I'm going to make a stitch, have a loop, go through this loop once or twice, and then bury the thread in the actual thread itself. Kind of just push it back up through the work, and then I'm going to snip this off. So as you open this up, you're going to kind of gently press this down with your fingers. You can iron this if you wanted to, but you can just finger press it. You know you've done a good job when it's not so tight that there's a huge ridge here, not so loose that it's falling apart, but essentially what will happen is it'll become a flat seam. So this is what it looks like on the one side. Maybe I did a little bit tight, and then flipping it over, now it's nice and smooth on that other side. So this is the right side. So what I would do now is just take the basting stitches out. And then that is the inside, that's the wrong side. Now we are using, of course, fabric turned back, so those raw edges are no longer visible, and you may put a piece of lining over this. In the 18th century, they would use fabric that had a beautiful selvage, so they'd actually do selvage to selvage. So if you ever look at an antique shift or shirt, or for example, if you're ever weaving fabric and you have a beautiful selvage, you can actually butt the selvages together, just like we did here, in order to create one seam. So like when they make blankets or sheets, it's actually the selvage to selvage that is butted together. So there's a lovely butted seam, perfect for piecing together fabric. Also a great technique if you are a weaver and you want to join 2 selvage edges together. Try this out. Let me know what you think. Happy sewing, everyone.